In military history, some leaders are made in academies, their careers paved with tradition. Others are born in the fire and chaos of combat. This is the story of the latter. It's the story of a man who would one day hold the highest military office in the United States, but who started out as a kid from Minneapolis, a teenager who lied about his age just to serve his country. This is how one brutal battle for a forgotten piece of ground didn't just create a soldier, it forged a legend. By the spring of 1943, the Allied invasion of North Africa had stalled. A massive army poised to crush the German Afrika Korps was stuck. The problem? One objective, a single brutal piece of high ground named Hill 609. It was a 600-meter-tall fortress of rock, bristling with German artillery and interlocking machine gun nests. Defending it were veteran troops who had turned its steep slopes into a kill zone. The men sent to take it weren't elite commandos. They were National Guardsmen, and one of their key leaders on the ground was barely out of his teens. This is the story of how the lessons learned on that hill by one young sergeant would change the United States Army forever.
Long before he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, John William Vessey Jr. was a kid from Minneapolis who wanted to serve. Born in 1922, he grew up during the Great Depression. In May 1939, with the world on the brink of war, a 16-year-old Vessey walked into a recruiter's office, lied, said he was 18, and enlisted in the Minnesota National Guard. His job was motorcycle courier for the 34th Red Bull Infantry Division's artillery. He was a classic citizen soldier. He graduated from high school in 1940, expecting to serve his weekend drills and live a normal life. But history had other plans. In February 1941, his unit was activated, and the young men of the 34th Infantry Division were on a path that led straight into World War II. Vessey, still a teenager, was no longer a part-time soldier. He was now on the front lines, as the 34th became one of the very first U.S. Army divisions sent to fight in the European theater. Their destination wasn't France, but the harsh, unforgiving deserts of North Africa. It was there that Private Vessey and his entire generation of American soldiers would face their first test.
North Africa was a brutal awakening for the American Army. Early fights against the battle-hardened Afrika Korps were humiliating defeats. The experience left a scar on the young soldiers, including John Vessey. It taught him a lifelong lesson about the need for realistic training, modern equipment, and air-ground cooperation. The Americans were learning, but they were paying for that education in blood. By April 1943, the tide was turning. The U.S. Second Corps, now under the famously tough Major General Omar Bradley, was ready to strike a final blow. The goal was the port city of Bizerte, but standing right in their way was a natural fortress, Hill 609. This wasn't just any hill. The Germans had turned Jebel Tayent, its local name, into the linchpin of their entire defensive line. From the top, they could call down devastating artillery fire on anyone in the valley below, pinning down 2 whole American divisions. The slopes were a nightmare of rock and interlocking machine gun nests. Some commanders wanted to bypass it, but Bradley knew that was impossible. To get to Bizerte, Hill 609 had to be taken. The job fell to the 34th Red Bull Division, Vessey's division. For them, this was about more than just a tactical objective. It was about redemption. After suffering huge losses in an earlier failed attack, the division's reputation had been unfairly tarnished. Bradley gave their commander a blunt order: "Get me that hill, and no one will ever again doubt the toughness of your division." The stage was set, and right in the middle of it was an artilleryman, now a 20-year-old first sergeant named John Vessey. First sergeant was, as Vessey later said, the toughest job in combat. You're not a distant commander. You're responsible for the lives and morale of your men right there in the thick of it. For an artillery battery supporting an assault on a fortress like Hill 609, that role was everything. The battle began on April 27, 1943. The men of the 34th threw themselves against the hill, a wave of American grit against a wall of German steel. The fighting was savage. The rocky ground offered almost no cover, and it was so hard you couldn't dig a proper foxhole. German shells rained down from Hill 609, while machine gun fire crisscrossed the slopes. As an artillery first sergeant, Vessey was at the heart of the storm. It was his job to keep the big guns of his battery firing accurately and constantly. He had to conduct this symphony of chaos, coordinating ammo deliveries under fire, replacing wounded crewmen, and making sure the howitzers were laying down a precise barrage to protect the infantrymen clawing their way up the hill. Every shell was a lifeline. Any delay, any mistake, could mean dozens of American lives lost. For 3 straight days, the battle raged. The 34th attacked relentlessly, taking ground 1 bloody yard at a time. The air was a constant scream of shells and the deafening chatter of machine guns. American tanks were brought in to blast away at German positions on the cliffs. Finally, on April 30th, the pressure broke them. Men from the 34th fought their way to the top. An American patrol established an observation post on the peak, and for the first time, U.S. soldiers looked down from Hill 609. They had done the impossible. But the fight wasn't over. For another full day, the Germans threw furious counterattacks, desperate to retake the hill. The Red Bulls held. The victory was a turning point. It was what many historians call the American Army's coming of age. It shattered the German line, opened the road to the Zert, and restored the honor of the division. And for First Sergeant Vessey, the brutal lessons learned in that fire would shape the rest of his career.
Stories like this are a powerful reminder of how ordinary people can show extraordinary courage under pressure. If you find these deep dives into military history compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Let us know in the comments, what other overlooked battles deserve to have their story told? The fall of Hill 609 was the beginning of the end for the Axis in North Africa. A week later, Berserk was captured, and the campaign was soon over. For the 34th Division and John Vessey, the war moved on to Italy, and there, on the bloody Anzio beachhead in May 1944, combat would forge his career in a new way. With casualties mounting and leaders falling, the 21-year-old first sergeant was given a battlefield commission. Pinned down under fire, he was made a second lieutenant and immediately sent forward to be a forward observer, the guy directing artillery from the most dangerous spot on the battlefield. It was the ultimate vote of confidence. The army saw that his leadership was too valuable to be kept with a single gun battery. He needed to be at the front.
Unlike so many others, Vessey didn't go home after the war. The boy who had lied to get in had found his calling. For the next 4 decades, the lessons of North Africa and Italy guided him. He became a champion for realistic training, knowing firsthand that inexperience had cost lives in the desert. He rose through the ranks, earning the Distinguished Service Cross in Vietnam for rallying his men and firing cannons point blank at an enemy force. He became a 4-star general. He commanded U.S. forces in Korea, and on June 18, 1982, John Vessey became the 10th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking officer in the nation, and the last World War II combat veteran to serve on active duty.
When he retired in 1985, General Vessey had served for 46 years. From a 16-year-old private to the president's top military advisor, his career was a masterclass in the lessons he learned as a young NCO. As President Reagan said of him, Jack Vessey always remembered the soldiers in the ranks. He understood those soldiers are the background of any army. He noticed them, spoke to them, looked out for them. That was the legacy of the first sergeant from Hill 609. He never forgot where he came from, and he spent a lifetime making sure the soldiers who came after him were better trained, better equipped, and better led than his generation had been when they first hit the battlefield. He was the teenage sergeant who conquered an impossible hill, and in doing so, he built a life of service that would change the American military forever.